Not too many people know this about me, but for a short time, I've done a lot of things in my life, and for a short time, I was an Elvis impersonator. I was in 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade, and I was obsessed with Elvis, and I would perform in school talent shows and would lip sync to his songs. I would show you some of my moves, but I don't need people swooning here in church. Elvis, of course, was known as the king of rock and roll. Or you have Michael Jackson, who was the king of pop. More recently, Mariah Carey tried to trademark the name Queen of Christmas. She was denied that title. And I marvel at how our nation responded to the death of Queen Elizabeth. And indeed, as Roger said, we now have the King of England. Today, we heard in 1 Timothy this title, King of Kings and Lord of Lords. And in many ways, the idea of a king is a foreign concept to those of us in America. In fact, the very founding of America was based on the fact that we did not want to have kings over us. We didn't want this lineage to be passed down through bloodlines, but wanted to instead have people chosen, leaders chosen by the people. And so America doesn't really understand kings other than the sort of self-proclaimed kings of pop culture that we've experienced. So what is a king? My daughter Maxine is starting to watch Disney films, and of course, they're full of princesses and princes and kings and queens, and so she was wondering, what exactly is a king? And we tried to explain that it's someone that has all of the power and all of the authority and all of the control over your life. And we also said that kings can either be good or bad. And, hint, hint, if you've ever read 1 Samuel 8, you can hear what God thinks of earthly kings, and it is not good. God essentially says to the people of Israel at that time, when they say, all of the people around us have kings, but we only have you, and we'd like to have an earthly king. God says, I don't think that that's what you want. If you have a king, they're going to be corrupt. They're going to take all of your property. They're going to abuse you. They're going to send your children to war. You don't want that. And the people say, no, really, we do. And God is such a good and loving and kind king, a true king, that he says, okay, I'll give you what you want. And sure enough, even though we have kings that we call good in the Bible, like King David, he's still a pretty terrible fellow in many ways, the stories that we hear, even though, again, we hold him up and say he's a great person of faith. He does some terrible things, and the kings before him and after him are sometimes good and sometimes bad, exactly as we told our daughter. Sure, in fairy tales, they are always good. But other than that, there always seems to be something in power that can corrupt people. But it doesn't stop us from loving them. Not only from afar, but let's be honest, we sort of love the idea of the royalty in the UK, but even here in our own country, our presidents have become nearly the same kind of status as kings. At least the way you'd hear people talk. You'd think that they have all of the power, that they can do no wrong. At the same time, we complain about them. I know that it's this weird double standard. I think it's because we understand that we aren't really supposed to have kings, and yet we love this idea of having someone that can simply be in charge of our lives. And indeed, the presidents and other leaders in our country do have a great deal of power. But I also think that our problem is that we give them way more power than we should. And so we heard 1 Timothy today talking about how we should instead give Jesus this position of being the King of Kings. Paul acknowledges that there are kings in the world, but what he says is Jesus is above that even. He is the King of Kings. And in some senses, this phrase doesn't make sense because there really aren't kings over kings. King really is the highest status that you can have. The only time that this wasn't true was in the Roman Empire when there was an emperor and then there were kings under the emperor. But generally, when we hear king, that's the highest status you can have. And so to say Jesus is the King of Kings is quite a statement. And yet it is 100% true. This name tells us something very important, which is that no matter how much power we think someone else has, whether it be a king here on earth or a president or a dictator, no matter how much power we think they have, Jesus has more. He is the ultimate ruler. There is no one above him in rank. And so, as Christians, if we claim to follow him, then we need to act like he is the ruler of all. So, Roger asked this question, I asked the same question. What would that look like? Because honestly, we vote like the person that we put into office might be able to save us, when only Jesus can save. And we vote like the one that we put into office could fix all of our problems, but only Jesus has that balm. We vote like the one we put into office might be able to make all things right, and yet Jesus is the only one who is righteous. We vote like the one we put into office is God. We come here on Sunday and proclaim that, no, we have faith in God, and God is God, and then we go back out into the world, and we act as if our allegiance is only to our politicians. But Advent is a time to remember our priorities, and it's a time when our priorities should be challenged. We can learn what power is really all about in the story of Christmas. Because this King of Kings does not come into the world riding on a stallion, fully armored, but instead arrives into the world the same way we all do, naked, screaming, vulnerable. That's our King of Kings. We're invited as Christians to await, again, the coming of this King of Kings, the only one that can truly rule and orient our lives toward right in a way that shows that we understand what is good and true. And it's hard. I'll admit it. Because our allegiances sway all over the place. And it sneaks in tiny ways. I had a seminary professor who said the life of Christian faith is actually about keeping your eyes on Jesus and really keeping your eyes on Jesus at all times. But what happens is we are very distractible. And we see something else go by and we sort of, and we lose sight of Jesus for a moment. And the Christian life is always about snapping our attention back to where it should be, on Jesus. And that's what it means to be King of Kings. He's the ruler of our lives, and yet we keep noticing these other rulers, and they can rule in different ways. It's not just the politicians in our lives. Sometimes we make choices in our own lives, not because of someone truly having power, but simply because of the opinions of others, and we let that have more power in our lives. We don't ask what is right or wrong. We simply ask, what would this person that I want to have them approve of me, what do they want me to do? And we make the decision based on that. Sometimes we make a decision based on what we think will be best for us, rather than honestly asking what would be best for the kingdom. But remember, what I've been talking about throughout this entire series is that we are meant to be a sign to people. And this day, we are to be a sign that we follow the King of Kings. And so, we've had all these different signs to help us remember. We started with Prince of Peace, and you can do that in two ways. I didn't teach you, but the most common way is, so you make a C, remember, because that represents Christ. This is to say Christ. But it's implied that Christ is the Prince of Peace, and so you can use Christ, but Prince of, and then remember peace is to change into quiet. Prince of Peace, the other proper way to do it is to make a P, to represent Prince, right? But there's a lot of shorthand, and people use Christ instead. Prince of Peace. Last week we talked about Emmanuel, which again, so there's a lot, anytime you represent royalty, the technical way you sign Emmanuel is to make an E and do the sash across. That's how it represents royalty. But I told you that what was really important is what it signifies, right? And that means that it's God with us, right? Then King of Kings. So again, this is one of those where, so I don't actually know sign language. I've spent weeks looking at people on Google explaining, what's the best way to sign things. And so technically, right, King of Kings would simply be, so what you do is that sash, but you're making a K, right? And you would do K, King of Kings. So remember, we already learned of, so you would technically just do King of Kings. But I found one woman, she's actually located in Detroit. She said, the problem is that in American Sign Language, you are trying to actually communicate the meaning behind the phrase, not simply communicate the literal words. And so she said, you'll see people do King of Kings. And she said, but that doesn't make sense. All you're saying to a non-hearing person is King, 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 King. What does that mean? What we really mean, she said, is King above all kings, right? I like this. It's a forceful sign. It's like, knock it out of the place, right? So you say, King above all kings, she says. That's the true meaning of this phrase, King of Kings. I really like that because this is this reminder. Each week I've been saying, the sign is important that we carry out into the world. This is this reminder that we need to knock those other priorities out of place and put Jesus first, right? So he truly is the King of Kings, right? I like that. That's true of the Fonzie, not Fozzie. That's my other favorite. Waka, waka, waka. I actually have a Fozzie mug that I drink coffee out of every single morning. Not a Fonzie mug, but thank you. Yeah, that's true. A little bit of that. Okay, no. See? We are so easily distracted and so flighty, and yet our invitation always, and we really, we do it intentionally in so many ways through the imagery that we use this time of year to remind us to be focusing on Jesus, right? We put the nativity front and center, and we put the characters in there from the story so that we're focused on that. We put a star on top of our trees, and the star is what guides us to that King of Kings. And so we're meant to, that's put at the highest point to remind us to go that way. Sometimes we put an angel up there. That's the one that brings the message of the King of Kings. And we're meant to keep our eyes on that. Yes, we are meant to refocus and put Christ above all and first and foremost. And I know that it's hard because I get just as distracted. And I get caught up in the idea that someone else might be able to fix things or make it right. That if we just vote the right person in, that maybe that'll fix things. Even more terrible, honestly, is that our society has come to the point where we just want to make sure that we don't vote the wrong person in, right? That we're not happy with anybody, but we'll take the lesser of two evils. I've talked about that before, right? I think it's sad that we've come to that point, but the reality is that as Christians, we have to reorient our lives and realize that that stuff isn't as important as having Jesus as our King. So what does that look like this week? What do we need to give up so that Jesus is truly the King of Kings? How will we act differently so that Jesus is our first priority? One thing I thought about is that, I don't know about you, but I wake up first thing in the morning and I begin thinking about the things that I need to do. It's a to-do list that I've made, and I found myself thinking, if I really wanted to live with Jesus as the King of Kings in my life, the ruler of all, I would wake up and not worry about the to-do list, but I would ask first, what does Jesus want me to do today? To reorient myself. Because he truly is the King of Kings. Another thing we celebrate is that there are kings that come to visit him. It's proof positive. They come and they kneel down and they worship him even though they are kings. It shows that he is above them, He's the only one that deserves the kind of allegiance that kind of allegiance in our lives. And yet we continue to give it to others and to other things and to other worries. We get distracted, and we need to reorient ourselves toward this name. Be a sign. Make Jesus a priority once again. Wake up each morning and ask, what does my King need me to do today? And then show the world that Jesus is the King of Kings, the Prince of Peace, Emmanuel. Amen.